it's stepping, when I recognize my powerlessness, I'm giving up the fantasy that I ever had any power to protect myself, that I could do this with my escapism and my avoidance, right? And I'm stepping into the reality that I can't. I don't have that power. And that from working, I'm now operating out of reality, and that is a powerful place. It's a powerful step from fantasy to reality.
Yeah. I don't know. When you were saying that, the image that came up to me is like a little kid, right? A lot of times when you're exposed to patterns of harm, you come up with your own coping mechanisms, right? And it's based on the way that you're interpreting things, the way that you're able to make sense of your world. And a lot of times it's not necessarily based on reality. It's based on what you can figure out to be able to survive or to make sense of what's going on or what's happening to you. And so that false reality, or that false, the inability to know what's really happening and why it's happening, follows them or follows us. I'm gonna put myself in there too, because we all have gone through some kind of trauma, when we're growing up, follows us all the way through, and it's on an unconscious level that we're responding to things. We're not even aware of how we were conditioned, how we were shaped because of that trauma, because of the way that we made sense of our experience. And it's almost
deep-seated beliefs.
Yes. So as they take it and you start to examine it, now you're bringing it from the unconscious up to the conscious level, so that way you can actually do something about it.
Now I'm aware that I'm performance driven, that's where I get my identity from. Now I'm aware of this. Once I become aware, I can perhaps begin to tackle some of it. I certainly can tackle it at some levels, and I may need support to dig into it. I get some trauma healing, right, or some other healing, and dig into it for a while. That's right. So tackling our lies, our inner lies, some of which aren't even in our consciousness yet.
And it's almost like, as you do that, right, you're separating yourself from that. And so it can feel like a loss of self, because they've been around for so long. It's like we're one with these things, right? Or these points of view. This is how I know myself. I've always been, but they're not you. And so by doing that, you're able to discover the real you.
Absolutely. Your best, you're right. Your core, your true self, right? Your highest self. And a lot of these things were put on us by culture, by family roles. Put on, as well as by traumas, right?
And I guess I want to spin it a little bit, right? That what a wonderful gift to give to yourself. What a wonderful gift to give to yourself, to say, I want to discover who I really am.
Absolutely.
By separating myself from the lies, from the cultural shaping or the family shaping or all those other things, and really decide. Because before we didn't have choice, but you have choice now to decide who I want to be and how I want to show up in the world and interact with the world. Coming from that place, now that's empowered.
Absolutely. And people can sometimes get discouraged because it doesn't happen overnight. Well, you weren't created with some of these habits, and these lies didn't come into you overnight either, right? They were trained into you in time, and they can be tackled and untrained in time. You can be a very different person in a year from now than you are right now. You can be such a different person in 3 years that you don't hardly recognize that woman back there, right? So don't what's 1 year, what's 3 years in terms of this journey? We would spend that much going to university.
We'd spend that much longer.
So why wouldn't we spend that much investing into finding the me that I am most content with?
So you're speaking to patience with self, right? Having patience with the process.
And I'm speaking both to partners, sex addicts and sex addicts, right? Both need patience with that process. It is a process, but it's so worth doing. So worth doing.
Yes. a lot of times, like when I speak with the sex addicts, there's a heavy judgment if they mess up, you know?
Yep. Yep.
What is the role of judgment in terms of this whole process, you know?
Yeah, and it's a tough one to distinguish because there is such a thing as kind of in our healthy surrender moment, there is meant to be a healthy acknowledgement of my harm to others, right? If I was talking from a spiritual perspective, we would call that repentance. Like, oh, I recognize I'm no better than anybody else. It's really a laying down of all my pride, of all my, you know what?
Mhm,
I'm just as weak. I'm just as
mhm.
fallible as anybody else. But you know what? I
Yeah.
know I'm also no worse. I'm also no worse
Mhm,
than any other human being. I am the average human being, right? This is
mhm.
it. So there's no reason to take on a toxic continual voice of beating myself and
Okay.
shaming
Okay.
myself and running myself down,
Okay.
because that's a toxic shame that
Yeah.
isn't going to serve us well, right? And it's well, sometimes I'll say to guys, I literally have said this to somebody in the past week, would you say what you are saying to any of the guys
Hmm,
here in group?
hmm.
Would you, if they came to you with what you're struggling with and the hurts you are currently carrying, and would you say that to them? Well, no, you wouldn't, right? So why are you saying it to you over and over
Mhm,
again, right?
mhm.
There's a difference between that beating myself up and that giving up, right? And recognition of what I did was awful, right? It was awful, and I can bear that. I can bear to hold that it was awful, but I'm not awful. I'm just
There
human.
you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Yeah. So again, it's that separating of self from the act, right?
That's right. That's right.
Separating the self from act. I did those things, but I'm not those things.
Exactly.
Able to
They
see
don't
that.
have to define me.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. You know, I love what you're pointing out there because it's self abuse, right? When you keep beating up on yourself like that, it's self abuse, and that is not the road to healing.
No, no, it's really not. No, it's no growth in that.
Not at all. You know, so the self love, right? Self forgiveness is important. That self grace that we spoke about earlier, you know, having some grace for yourself as you go through that process is important in order to have healthy healing take place, healthy recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So that's another piece of it. So I would say first there's this recognition, and step 4 of the addiction model, we'll talk about this fearless moral inventory. It is where I really take it out and I look at it, and I'm by that point hopefully I've gathered enough strength. I guess I'm going to back up. The next step prior to that is probably learning how to sit with my negative emotions and not have to medicate, right? Not have to not have to avoid them through my addictive behaviors or through running away or fantasy or any one of several avoidance mechanisms, right? But actually sit and know that these do not define me. Right?
Mm,
I can feel these negative feelings, and they aren't who I am either. They will pass.
yeah.
Right? Negative feelings will come and go, and I will be okay. Right? So learning that skill, then moving into this. Okay, and so my fearless moral inventory. This is what I've done. This is who I've hurt,
Mhm,
and looking where do I may need to make some amends. I may not. I may need to not in some cases. They're
mhm,
always they ask you to exercise wisdom when they get you to 12-step process, because some
mhm.
people don't want you coming back to talk about it. They're not into it.
Nope.
So you respect that, but for those who you can make amends to, right? You do that process, and that's a reconciling process, which can be very empowering itself and very healing, and especially when you're supported in choosing wisely
Mhm.
how you're gonna do that, and which relationships you're gonna try to do that with. Um, so that's also very empowering and healing, and causes growth.
Yeah. I like what you were sharing about, you know, being able to sit with your emotions, with those negative emotions, and I was just wondering, how would they build that capacity to do that? Because emotions can get overwhelming. Oh my God,
It sure
right?
can. Yep.
And you could feel like, oh, I'm not going to survive this. I'll fall apart. I won't be able to put myself back together. A lot of stuff can come at you with that. So how can they build their capacity in that?
Yeah. And I think a lot of our counseling work starts with that. And you and I think we're talking right now more about the person with the addiction, but also the person who's been traumatized by abusive
Yes. Oh,
behaviors,
yeah.
right? We do a lot of work at the beginning on learning how to, we call ground, right? Ground ourselves. We learn how to expand our capacity. So exercises that we practice again and again. And people will find their own specific ones. I usually talk about, most counselors are going to tell you about breathing, pretty quickly, right? Because it's one you take with you everywhere you go. And no matter what the situation is, you can slow down your breathing. And that helps separate me immediately from those feelings, right? Slows my heart rate, slows my racing thoughts. So I don't have to start to become physiologically caught up in those emotions or in the situation that may be sparking those emotions. I can slow myself down and remind myself that this is not who I am, right? It's not going to determine who I am. It's just a situation to be dealt with, right? And the negative emotions will pass. They won't always be there. So many forms of these kinds of exercises will help change our brain to build our capacity, right? To be able to stay grounded. Building empathy. In particular, I'm looking for grounding exercises that are focused on connection. So thankfulness, practicing thankfulness, where if I'm working with couples, I'll get them to think about at least one thing. Especially, I will not, lean on traumatized women who are just struggling to take a breath to do anything. So please, if you're out there and that's where you're at, just know I would not be saying, hey, you should be doing this every day. When you're ready, if you can think of one thing that you're thankful for in your partner or spouse, one bit of gratitude with regards to them. And if you're not ready, other things that you encounter every day in your day, right, for which you can experience some gratitude and meditate on that. It's going to change your brain. It's going to open up your relational circuits more, right, and spark them. And if it's not your spouse, and I'm saying that to those who are experiencing trauma with regards to having been victimized by their spouse, please, think about other people too in your life who are doing good to you, right? And that helps push against that, because with the trauma, you can be afraid of everybody to begin with, right? Everyone feels unsafe. So, and yet in your cognitive brain, you probably know, well, no, it's probably not true that everyone's unsafe. That's the trauma brain, right? That's the trauma trying to keep me safe. But so I can expand my capacity and get past the trauma, I'm going to remind myself of somebody, right, who felt like a blessing today. Right?
Yeah. As you share that, I'm reminded of a couple of things, right, from heart math, right? The heart focused breathing technique, where it's really you picturing your breath going through your heart, right?
Nice.
To be able to help with the self-regulation. To bring it down, or the quick coherence, where you're thinking about a regenerative emotion, right? That'll be able to, that you can grab onto, and it can be about your pet, your children, something, but it speaks life, or it gives life to you, and you're actually allowing that to actually go through your heart area, so this way it works from the bottom up. So the heart regulates the mind and then gets the emotions in check without you having to think, oh, I need to calm down.
Right.
Well, I need to be regulated.
That negative self-talk as opposed to
which makes it so difficult to be able to do that. So when you use the heart's intelligence, right, that it informs the rest of you, and it sends out its pulses. Very helpful for it to do that, because then everybody obeys when the heart starts speaking, right?
Nice.
So that's very helpful. But the other thing I'm reminded of is something called Ho'oponopono, which is a prayer, Hawaiian prayer. And I think that can also help them, right?
Yeah,
Just by
absolutely.
saying those 4 things, I'm sorry. And just being able to release that, I'm sorry. Shedding some of that weight that you're carrying over, please forgive me. And sometimes the hardest thing to do is forgive ourselves. So when I use it for the self, right?
Yeah.
Please forgive me.
Yeah.
Not asking another person to forgive. Please forgive me. Michelle, please forgive me. Okay? For the things that I've done, the choices that I made, the things that I exposed us to, all that stuff. Forgive me. And then we're reaffirming, I love you. Michelle, I love you. Love you. How many times do we say that to ourselves? I love you. Even with everything that I know about you, I love you. I love you. The whole of you. The flawed and not flawed. The whole you.
Yeah.
I love
Strong
you.
and the weak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then to finish it up, just saying thank you. I thank you for being. I thank you for taking this journey with me. I thank you for just, willingness to change. I thank you. So being able to put in what you need. And that's one of the things that I like to use with people as they're dealing with these emotions. Say that to yourself, because a lot of times we didn't get that kind of validation for acknowledgement or anything when we were growing up. And so we don't know how to do it for ourselves. But if you don't do it for you, how can you do it for another? You got to connect. You got to connect with yourself.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I love the whole Ho'oponopono, and I've used that with clients as well.
Yeah.
That's very powerful. One from a similar, from where you're just instead inviting God to speak those really similar kinds of things back into you is manual journaling. The help clients do, and I've had lots of clients come back and talk about how powerful that was. You just, okay, what would God say to me right now?
I like that.
What is His perspective? What's He seeing? What's He hearing?
Yeah.
That's I see, I hear you. I know how big this is for you, right? I know how big this is for you. I know it may relate to things in the past that were really big, right? And then I'm glad to be with you. Right? So glad to, we know that God is glad to be with us. And to hear that, like a parent saying, whatever your weaknesses are, I'm glad to be with you, right? And the last step is, I can do something about this. And the something can be just something in us, right? Just a subtle shift in us.
Well, I am going to invite you to share that one with me. I want you to send me that.
I'll send you the worksheet. Yeah.
Because I love that, especially if we had difficulty with our parents, right?
Yeah.
God, because a lot of times our view of God is based on the view of our parents, right? But that's so powerful that He wants to be with
the
us.
Healing parent.
Yes.
He'd be the perfect
nurturing.
Yeah, when ours couldn't be.
Oh, yeah.
And we couldn't be either. None of us can be the parent of all capacity.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I love that. Thank you.